Steelers Nation. The possibility of the Pittsburgh Steelers exploring quarterback Brendan Sorsby is quickly becoming one of the most fascinating storylines surrounding the organization. And what makes this situation so interesting is that it is not based on speculation alone. According to reports discussed recently, the Steelers are actively doing their homework on Sorsby ahead of the upcoming supplemental draft, and that immediately raises questions about how the front office views the future of the quarterback position. What is important for fans to understand is that doing homework on a player does not automatically mean the Steelers are preparing to draft him. Good NFL organizations investigate every possible opportunity, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. Pittsburgh does not currently have a long-term franchise quarterback firmly established for the future, so it would be irresponsible for the organization to ignore a talented prospect entering a unique draft situation. The reports indicate that the Steelers are still gathering information and evaluating every aspect of Sorsby's profile. That includes both his football ability and concerns that have followed him off the field. The organization is reportedly trying to determine exactly how significant those concerns are and whether they would be comfortable taking the risk if the value becomes attractive enough. Another interesting detail is that this investigation is not something that started recently. Reports suggest the Steelers have been looking into Sorsby for months. That alone tells you that this is not a last-minute reaction. The team has apparently been monitoring him for quite some time, collecting information and building a complete picture before making any decision. The challenge for Pittsburgh is figuring out exactly what Sorsby's value is. Opinions across football circles appear to be all over the place. Some observers believe a team could spend a very high draft asset to acquire him in the supplemental draft. Others believe his value is much lower, potentially falling into the later rounds because of the risks attached to his profile. One of the most revealing pieces of information involves feedback Sorsby reportedly received before deciding to remain in college rather than enter the regular NFL draft. The belief from some connected evaluators was that teams viewed him more as a third-round talent at that time. That evaluation becomes extremely important because it helps explain how NFL decision-makers may currently view him. At the same time, there are people who see much more upside. The attraction is easy to understand. Sorsby possesses a rare physical profile that naturally grabs attention. He has impressive size, strong arm talent, mobility, and the ability to make plays outside of structure. Those traits are difficult to teach and often become the foundation of successful NFL quarterbacks. However, the concerns are equally real. Evaluators have pointed to his mental processing as an area that still needs significant development. Reading defenses consistently, working through full field progressions, anticipating throws before receivers come open, and operating efficiently from the pocket are all areas where he is viewed as a work in progress. In other words, he is not considered a quarterback who is ready to step into an NFL lineup immediately. That reality creates a fascinating connection to the Steelers. Pittsburgh may actually represent one of the best developmental environments available for a young quarterback. The current structure would allow a prospect to sit, learn, and develop rather than being forced onto the field before he is ready. For a player like Sorsby, that could be extremely valuable, but this is where the story becomes far more complicated. The Steelers already invested significant draft capital in Drew Aller. That decision cannot simply be ignored. If Pittsburgh were to make a serious move for Sorsby, the organization would essentially be admitting that they view him as a better long-term option than a player they already spent a premium selection on. That creates a difficult roster equation. There may not be enough room to carry multiple developmental quarterbacks who both require time before being ready to contribute. If the Steelers were to aggressively pursue Sorsby, it could potentially create major questions about Aller's future with the organization. The front office therefore has to evaluate more than just Sorsby's talent. They must determine whether he is talented enough to justify not only the supplemental draft investment, but also the investment they already made in Aller. That is a much higher standard than simply deciding whether Sorsby is a good prospect. And that is exactly why this story deserves attention from Steelers fans. This is no longer just about a supplemental draft quarterback. It is about how Pittsburgh views its long-term future at the most important position in football, and whether the organization believes it has already found its answer or is still searching for something better. If the Steelers ultimately decide to make a move, it would send a powerful message about how highly they value Brendan Sorsby compared to the quarterbacks already in the building. But do you think Pittsburgh should stay committed to Drew Drew Aller, or would you take the gamble on Brendan Sorsby if the opportunity becomes available? The biggest factor that could ultimately determine this entire situation is not Brendan Sorsby's talent level. It is whether the Steelers believe he is significantly better than what they already have. That distinction matters because Pittsburgh did not accidentally end up with Drew Aller. They intentionally used the 76th overall pick to bring him into the organization, and many around the league believe that selection itself showed the Steelers were higher on Aller than much of the NFL. When the Steelers made that pick, they were investing in a developmental quarterback with physical tools, arm strength, and long-term upside. The expectation was never that Aller would immediately become the answer. The plan appeared to be giving him time to learn, develop, and prepare for a future opportunity. That developmental path remains intact today. Because of that, bringing in Sorsby would create a direct comparison between two quarterbacks who are in very similar stages of their careers. Neither is viewed as a finished product. Neither is expected to step into an NFL starting role immediately. Both would benefit from time on the bench, learning the professional game before taking over a franchise. That is where the roster challenge becomes impossible to ignore. The Steelers are operating with a team that believes it can compete now. This is not a rebuilding roster. This is not a situation where the organization can simply stockpile developmental quarterbacks and wait several years to see what happens. Every roster spot matters, every decision matters, and perhaps most importantly, every backup quarterback matters. If the starter misses time, Pittsburgh cannot afford to turn to a player who is completely unprepared for NFL action. That reality creates pressure to maintain a quarterback room that balances development with reliability. Carrying multiple quarterbacks who both need extensive development could become difficult to justify. From that perspective, many observers believe that if Sorsby were acquired, someone else would eventually become expendable. The most obvious name in that discussion would be Aller, not because the Steelers dislike him, but because the organization would essentially be choosing between two long-term projects. That is why the draft value discussion becomes so important. Think about it from Pittsburgh's perspective. If the Steelers were to surrender a valuable supplemental draft pick for Sorsby, they would effectively be attaching that cost to the investment already made in Aller. The combined investment becomes much larger than simply evaluating one player in isolation. For that reason, Pittsburgh would likely need to view Sorsby as considerably more valuable than Aller before making such a move. If the Steelers have both quarterbacks graded similarly, there would be little reason to spend additional resources. The organization would simply continue developing the player it already selected. On the other hand, if the front office and coaching staff believe Sorsby possesses a higher ceiling, greater playmaking ability, and a better chance to eventually become a franchise quarterback, then the calculation changes dramatically. And there are certainly traits that could tempt decision makers. Sorsby's size stands out immediately. His physical build appears tailor-made for the AFC North, a division known for demanding toughness and durability from quarterbacks. He has the arm strength to attack difficult throwing windows. He can create outside the pocket when plays break down. He has enough athletic ability to stress defenses with his legs while still operating primarily as a passer. Those qualities naturally generate excitement because they are difficult to find. Quarterbacks with high-end physical tools will always attract attention from teams searching for long-term answers. At the same time, the Steelers cannot ignore the risks. The off-field concerns remain part of the evaluation process. There are also legitimate football questions regarding his readiness. While the upside is intriguing, there is no guarantee that his developmental areas will improve quickly enough to justify the investment. Project quarterbacks are called projects for a reason. Some develop into stars, others never fully put everything together. That uncertainty is precisely why the Steelers continue gathering information instead of rushing toward a decision. What makes this story so compelling for fans is that it offers a rare glimpse into how NFL organizations think. Every team wants to find its next franchise quarterback. The challenge is determining when to stay committed to the plan already in place and when to pivot toward a potentially better opportunity. Right now, Pittsburgh appears to be exploring every possibility. The organization is studying Sorsby, evaluating the risks, measuring the potential reward, and comparing all of it against the quarterbacks already on the roster. That process alone tells us how seriously the Steelers take the search for their future at the position. The reality is that nothing appears decided yet. The supplemental draft is still ahead, evaluations are still ongoing, and the Steelers have time to determine whether Brendan Sorsby is simply another prospect worth researching or a quarterback worth fundamentally altering their long-term plans for. As things stand, the odds may still favor Pittsburgh staying with Drew Aller and continuing the developmental path they already chose. But the fact that Sorsby's name continues to surface around the organization shows that the conversation is far from over, and the coming weeks could reveal just how strongly the Steelers feel about his potential. What makes this entire discussion even more fascinating is the timing. The Steelers are not evaluating Brendan Sorsby in a vacuum. They are evaluating him while simultaneously trying to build a sustainable future at the quarterback position. Every decision they make today could impact the direction of the franchise for years to come. That is why reports suggesting Pittsburgh has been monitoring Sorsby for months should not be dismissed. Teams do not spend that amount of time gathering information on a player unless they believe there is at least some possibility that player could become relevant to their plans. Whether that relevance ultimately turns into a draft selection is another question entirely, but the interest in learning more is clearly there. The challenge for the Steelers is determining where potential ends and practical reality begins. On film, Sorsby offers traits that are easy to get excited about. His physical tools immediately stand out. He has the size that teams look for. He has the arm strength to challenge defenses at every level of the field. He has mobility that allows him to extend plays when protection breaks down. Those characteristics naturally lead evaluators to imagine what he could become if everything develops properly, but NFL front offices are paid to focus on what a player is today as much as what he could become tomorrow. That is where the developmental concerns become a major part of the conversation. Processing speed at the professional level is one of the most difficult transitions for young quarterbacks. College football often allows talented passers to rely on athletic ability and arm talent. The NFL is different. Defenses disguise coverages better, windows close faster, mistakes become more costly. For Sorsby, that learning curve could be substantial. The Steelers would need to be confident that their coaching staff could help accelerate that development. They would need to believe that the quarterback they see 2 or 3 years from now is worth the patience required today. That is not always an easy projection to make, even for experienced evaluators. What makes Pittsburgh's situation unique is that they appear to have an environment designed specifically for quarterback development. A young quarterback entering the organization would not be expected to save the franchise immediately. Instead, he would have the opportunity to learn behind a veteran presence while working on the technical aspects of his game. For a player with upside but incomplete development, that setup is attractive. The question becomes whether the Steelers view Sorsby as enough of an upgrade in long-term potential to justify disrupting the